She only wanted a job. But the CEO made her an irresistible offer at the interview. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and comment where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The alarm blared non-stop at 7 in the morning, and Madeline Harper reached out and silenced it with a deep sigh. Another day was beginning, bringing the same uncertainties that had been piling up week after week. She got up slowly, crossed the small one-bedroom apartment she rented in an old Chicago building, and headed to the tiny kitchen. She made a simple cup of coffee, her mind already weighed down by the sight of the overdue bills stuck to the side of the fridge with magnets late rent, an electric bill on the verge of disconnection, credit card statements. Her bank balance barely covered the basics. Since being laid off from her receptionist job at a dental clinic a little over 2 months ago, every attempt to find a new job had ended in failure. She submitted resumes daily for any position that came up on job sites. There was no room for being selective anymore. The debts kept growing. Rent was 2 months overdue, and the landlord had given a final deadline less than 10 days left. After finishing her coffee, Madeline opened her old laptop and began another morning of searching, scrolling through job platforms while trying to suppress her growing anxiety. The hours passed in a mechanical rhythm. She updated her resume, responded to job postings, sent emails. When replies came at all, they were always polite rejections. "Thank you for your interest, but we've chosen another candidate." Around noon, her phone vibrated on the table. An unfamiliar number appeared on the screen. With a nod in her stomach, worried it was a debt collector, Madeline answered. To her surprise, the voice on the other end was professional and polite. The woman introduced herself as an assistant to the executive office of Preston and Locke, one of the city's most prestigious companies. She explained that they had reviewed her resume and that Mr. Miles Preston, the company's CEO, requested an in-person interview the next day at 10 a.m. at their office. For a few seconds, Madeline was speechless. She never imagined her modest resume would catch the eye of a corporation of that caliber. Her hand trembled as she jotted down the address and thanked the caller, unable to hide her astonishment. The afternoon passed in a blur. Madeline kept trying to make sense of what had happened. She remembered responding to a vague posting for an administrative position with very few details. She had no idea what to expect. Her mind raced with possibilities, but deep down, a flicker of hope began to grow. It was the first concrete response she'd received in weeks. By the end of the day, she carefully selected the best outfit she owned. It wasn't much, a plain, simple ensemble paired with old but polished shoes. She ironed everything, packed her bag, and printed a copy of her resume. As night fell, sleep seemed impossible. Anxiety filled her every thought. If this interview turned out to be a real opportunity, it could change everything. The mounting bills, the constant fear of eviction, they all weighed heavily on her chest. When she finally drifted off, it was already the early hours of the morning. The chosen outfit lay neatly folded on a chair beside the bed. The next morning, Madeline woke before the alarm. She took a quick shower, carefully styled her hair, and applied a light layer of makeup to cover the signs of sleepless nights. Leaving the apartment early, she caught the L train and made her way across the city to the financial district, where glass skyscrapers reflected the soft morning light. She stopped in front of Preston and Locke's towering headquarters, surrounded by professionals in sharp suits and leather briefcases. For a moment, Madeline took a deep breath, feeling the contrast between her simple appearance and the sophisticated surroundings. She walked inside. An impeccably dressed receptionist greeted her and led her to a panoramic elevator. She rode up to the top floor, where an assistant was waiting. The woman asked her to wait in a spacious room with modern furnishings and understated decor. Madeline's heart pounded. She didn't know if she'd be meeting a manager or someone much higher up. Moments later, the door opened. Madeline quickly rose to her feet. It wasn't the manager who entered, but Miles Preston himself. Tall, sharply dressed, and with a commanding presence, he filled the room. His tailored dark suit was flawless, and the strong features of his face revealed a man accustomed to power and responsibility. He greeted her with a firm handshake and motioned for her to sit. He wasn't looking at the paper in her hand, but straight at her. His voice was direct and measured. He explained that he had read her resume, but this wouldn't be a conventional interview. He was looking for someone with specific qualities: discretion, authenticity, sincerity. Not an ordinary administrative assistant, but someone who could accompany him to social functions and business trips, presenting the image of a trustworthy and genuine woman. The salary was generous, the contract advantageous. Madeline could hardly believe what she was hearing. The conversation lasted more than 30 minutes. Miles listened to her responses with keen interest. Madeline answered honestly, without trying to hide her difficult situation or exaggerate her skills. At the end, Miles told her she could take some time to consider the offer, but expected an answer by the next day. When Madeline left the building, her mind was spinning. The district's bustling streets seemed surreal, so far removed from her struggling reality. She found a bench on the wide sidewalk and sat there for a few minutes, trying to gather her thoughts. The offer was beyond anything she had imagined, a job she never thought possible, but also a real opportunity to escape her current situation. She took a deep breath. She would need some time to think it through. Madeline spent the rest of the afternoon and much of the night trying to process everything she had heard in that sleek office. Miles Preston's offer was unlike any job opportunity she had ever pursued. It wasn't for an administrative position or typical office duties. It was something more personal, a role of trust that would require her presence, poise, and image alongside one of Chicago's most influential businessmen. There had been no hint of any inappropriate intentions, at least not in the words he had used. But it was clear the role went far beyond the boundaries of an ordinary job, and the financial offer was generous enough to instantly resolve the problems that had been keeping her awake at night. Madeline knew that if she turned it down, she might not get another opportunity this real for a long time. Even so, the fear of the unknown weighed heavily. Would she be able to move naturally in such a sophisticated world? Would she be accepted or dismissed as an outsider? The night stretched on, and she couldn't relax. She kept picturing situations where she would have to accompany Miles to gala dinners, receptions with executives, and events where everyone seemed to navigate with a confidence she didn't possess. Her wardrobe was modest, her manners simple. She had never even set foot in an upscale social environment. The thought of being out of place filled her with dread, but images of the bills on her fridge and the landlord's eviction notice kept flashing in her mind. This might be her only real shot at changing her suffocating circumstances. Around 2 a.m, Madeline finally picked up her phone. She wrote and rewrote the message countless times before sending it. Mr. Preston, I accept your offer. I am willing to learn and fully commit. When she finally hit send, she stared at the screen for long moments, her heart racing. Early the next morning, her phone vibrated, waking her up. A new message had arrived. Please report to my office today at 3 p.m. We will finalize the contract. Miles Preston's direct response left no room for doubt. He wasn't a man who wasted time. Madeline quickly got herself ready, choosing her most understated outfit again, carefully styling her hair, and heading out with her stomach in knots. Arriving once more at Preston and Locke's imposing building, she was greeted by the same assistant from the day before and led to a room where a company lawyer was already waiting with the paperwork. Madeline read through each clause carefully, Everything was spelled out clearly. This wasn't a facade, nor a personal relationship. It was a professional agreement to serve as a social and travel companion for corporate events, with full respect for her boundaries and image. The salary exceeded anything she had ever imagined. After signing the contract, she was called into Miles's office. He greeted her with a steady gaze and a subtle nod of approval. He explained that a full preparation package would be arranged. Etiquette lessons, image consulting, basic knowledge about the financial sector, and the social circles she would be moving in. He also informed her that an advance payment equal to 1 month's salary would be deposited later that same afternoon. Her first official engagement would be a gala dinner 10 days from now. Madeline left the office with trembling hands and a face flushed with a strange blend of relief and nervous anticipation. The deposit came through before the day's end. With the money, she was finally able to pay her overdue rent and some of the most pressing bills. For the first time in weeks, she was able to sleep without the constant fear of losing her home. The days that followed were a whirlwind. She began an intensive training program, led by an image consultant at an upscale atelier in the Gold Coast. There, she tried on clothing she would never have dared to touch before. She learned the subtleties of formal behavior, what to avoid, how to carry herself in conversations with executives and investors. At the same time, an assistant from Preston and Locke provided her with background on key corporate contacts and the dynamics of elite social circles. It was a new world, distant, almost surreal. But Madeline absorbed everything with growing focus and determination. She couldn't afford to fail, not this time. This was her chance. Her interactions with Miles in those first days were brief. He observed her progress from a distance, but when he did appear, his gaze was sharp and quietly interested in the details of her transformation. During one fitting session at the atelier, Miles showed up unexpectedly. He studied her carefully, without rushing. After a few moments, he simply said in a calm, measured tone, "You're doing better than I expected." Simple words, but they warmed Madeline's heart. That night, back at her small apartment, she sat on the edge of her bed. The space was still modest and tiny, just as before. But something inside her had already shifted. A new path had opened. And though she didn't yet know where it would lead, she was ready to follow it. The days that followed passed at such an intense pace that Madeline barely found time to reflect on the decision she had made. Her mornings started early with detailed etiquette and image-building sessions. Her afternoons were filled with classes that uncovered the inner workings of the corporate world and elite social circles. At night, she spent hours reviewing names, faces, titles, and subtle nuances of behavior, trying to absorb as much as possible before making her public debut at Miles Preston's side. At first, this world felt unattainable, almost unreal. But with each passing day, she noticed her body and mind adapting. Her interactions with Miles also grew more frequent. He would appear at unexpected moments to assess her progress, offering objective comments that revealed a growing interest. Never once did he make her feel uncomfortable. Miles came across as a serious, determined man with a clear vision of what he expected from her. Over time, Madeline began to better understand the situation taking shape around her. Miles Preston was one of the country's most respected businessmen, known for his impeccable public image and extremely private personal life. He was rarely seen at events with anyone on his arm. The contract she had signed wasn't just for show. There was a deliberate strategy behind it to project stability and respect in an increasingly competitive corporate landscape. With that came a level of exposure that could invite scrutiny and gossip. Madeline understood the risks. Still, she resolved not to let any of it shake her. Her priority was to secure her financial future and maintain her dignity. And to her, On surprise, a new curiosity had begun to stir within her. Who was this man really, who had chosen her for such a delicate role? And why did he show such particular care for every detail of her preparation? The gala dinner that would mark her official debut was fast approaching. Miles was direct. On the night of the event, she was not to worry about a thing. A private car would be sent to pick her up. An elegant gown was being crafted by a renowned designer. Hair and makeup would be handled by trusted professionals. Her only responsibility was to be ready and on time. Madeline accepted each instruction with a mix of nervousness and anticipation. The life she had known until now seemed light years away, but there was no turning back. On the appointed day, a personal stylist arrived at her modest apartment to complete the final fittings on the gown. It was a sophisticated piece, perfectly tailored to flatter her figure without being overdone. As she looked at herself in the mirror, Madeline barely recognized her reflection. Something within her had already begun to change. When the sleek black car pulled up in front of her building, Madeline took a deep breath before stepping outside. The driver opened the door courteously, and she was whisked through the illuminated streets of Chicago to the event venue, a historic ballroom in one of the city's most iconic buildings. Miles was waiting for her at the entrance, impeccable. In a dark suit, his presence commanding both respect and attention. When he saw her, he offered his arm with effortless ease. He said nothing, but his approving glance spoke volumes. Madeline's heart raced. From this point forward, everything would be different. Together, they entered the ballroom, drawing nearly every gaze in the room as the couple made their entrance. The reaction was immediate. Many in attendance knew Miles and were visibly surprised to see him accompanied by an unfamiliar woman. Madeline kept her composure, recalling every piece of advice from her training. Her smile was soft, her responses polite. She greeted each guest introduced to her with poise. Miles appeared pleased, his confidence in her clear in every small gesture. Throughout the evening, they conversed with business leaders, politicians, and artists. What impressed Madeline most was how naturally she found herself fitting in. The initial nerves gradually gave way to a growing sense of confidence. By the end of the night, Miles escorted her to the car. Before the door closed, he leaned in slightly and murmured, "You've exceeded all my expectations." Back in her apartment, Madeline sat on the edge of her bed, still dressed from the evening. Her mind raced with everything she had experienced. She was exhausted, but there was a different energy coursing through her. For the first time in a long while, fear of debt and uncertainty wasn't dominating her thoughts. A new path had opened before her. There was still much to discover, but now she felt strong enough to face whatever might come. Miles's words echoed in her mind. She had exceeded expectations. And now, a new question began to take shape. What else lay ahead? In the days that followed the gala dinner, Madeline's routine shifted completely. Nearly every morning, her phone would ring with new instructions and appointments. Miles's personal assistant sent her the day's schedule, which included image enhancement sessions, reading materials on the corporate world, and frequent invitations to join him at private lunches and small receptions. The impact of her appearance at Miles's side during the gala had been greater than she'd imagined. Comments began circulating in social columns and industry blogs, speculating about the young woman seen with the notoriously private CEO. Miles, it seemed, showed no concern. He remained calm and focused, as always. For Madeline, handling the sudden attention wasn't easy. But the contract had been clear. She was there for work, and public opinion wasn't supposed to distract her from her role. Amid this new dynamic, another invitation arrived, this time for an exclusive dinner with a small group of top executives and international investors. Miles wanted her there and emphasized the importance of the occasion. When Madeline read the message, her heart pounded. Even after the gala, she still wondered whether she could truly live up to expectations in such a select setting. This would be different. An intimate gathering, without the protective anonymity of a large crowd. Every movement, every glance, every word would carry even more weight. As always, Miles handled all the preparations. A new, elegant dress was selected to suit the tone of the event. Professional hair and makeup appointments were arranged. Every detail was meticulously planned so Madeline would look flawless. That evening, the car from Preston and Locke pulled up in front of her building. Madeline stepped out, steadying her breath, trying to calm her nerves. During the ride through Chicago's glowing streets, she gazed out the window, taking everything in. The driver stopped in front of a sophisticated restaurant reserved exclusively for this dinner. Inside, Miles was already there, engaged in conversation with a small group of businessmen. When she entered, their eyes met briefly. Without surprise or any show of emotion, he walked over and, with a subtle gesture, guided her to the group. The introductions flowed naturally. Madeline held her composure, speaking when appropriate and listening attentively. Miles, standing beside her, projected quiet confidence, which helped calm her further. Little by little, she began to feel more comfortable in this setting that only days before would have seemed unreachable. Throughout the dinner, moments alone with Miles were brief but deeply meaningful. During one short break while the other guests stepped away, he leaned in slightly and said in a low voice, "You're doing very well, much more than I expected." The words struck a chord in Madeline. It wasn't just professional praise there. It was a subtle note of camaraderie that stirred her in ways she hadn't anticipated. At the end of the evening, after saying goodbye to the guests, Miles accompanied Madeline to the car. Before opening the door, he paused, meeting her eyes. There was respect in his gaze, but something else, something harder to define. He gently squeezed her hand before helping her in. The simple gesture left her heart racing back in her apartment. Well into the early hours, sleep was elusive. The night replayed in her mind, each gesture, each glance, every word Miles had spoken. It was impossible to ignore that something was shifting between them. Though Miles kept his outward composure, small nuances in his behavior had begun to emerge, moments where his usual reserve seemed to soften. Madeline tried to push these thoughts aside, but there was no denying how she felt. There was now a blend of admiration, respect, and something more personal, more intimate. Growing stronger with every encounter. Sunday morning brought a new message with the upcoming week's schedule. Among the usual commitments and events, one detail stood out. Miles requested that she accompany him on a 2-day business trip to downstate Illinois. Madeline agreed without hesitation. She spent the rest of the day preparing, carefully selecting the appropriate outfits and packing her suitcase. The pace of work had intensified, and this new rhythm was already beginning to feel like a part of her life. As she zipped her bag and looked around her apartment, she realized how much her world had already changed. And for the first time in a long while, she felt no fear about what lay ahead. The trip had been scheduled for an early Friday morning. A sleek black car arrived to pick Madeline up, and she reached the Preston and Locke headquarters well ahead of time. In the lobby, she was informed that Miles was already waiting. When she stepped into the private departure lounge, he stood there, immaculate in a gray suit, his sharp gaze somehow managing to calm her. He greeted her with a small nod and motioned that it was time to leave. The ride to the executive airport passed in a quiet, almost comfortable silence. Inside the private jet, Miles reviewed reports and documents, while Madeline watched the landscape out the window, trying to steady the nerves swirling inside her. Their destination was a small city downstate, where they would attend an international conference, and hold private meetings with investors. Upon arrival, they were taken to an upscale hotel. Miles had a suite, and she was given a room nearby. Despite her efforts to stay composed, Madeline felt a nervous flutter she couldn't quite shake. This would be the first time they would spend 2 full days in such close proximity. The pace of the trip was relentless. The moment they landed, the string of appointments began, back to back. Madeline accompanied Miles to every meeting, every encounter. She watched closely how he spoke, the confidence he projected, the control he held in every situation. And between the day's commitments, she started noticing glimpses of the man behind the commanding presence. Beneath that polished exterior was someone who carried a weariness few would ever see, and at times, when his eyes met hers, a softness would emerge. On the afternoon of their second day, they managed a rare break and walked together through the hotel's gardens. Miles spoke with a more relaxed tone, offering glimpses of a life shaped by relentless effort and responsibility. Madeline listened intently. Without even realizing it, her own feelings began to entwine with every word he spoke. It was no longer possible to view him as merely her employer. Later that evening, Miles invited her to dine at the hotel restaurant. They chose a secluded table, far from the formal air that had defined the past 2 days. Their conversation flowed naturally. Miles asked questions about her interests, her life, her experiences. His curiosity was genuine, and Madeline found herself drawn in more deeply. It was hard to maintain her composure under the weight of his gaze, one that held both respect and something else, something far more personal. Their shared glances lingered longer than before, and though she tried to steady herself, Madeline's heart raced with every passing moment. As they returned to the hotel, Miles accompanied her to the elevator. The silence between them felt different, now thick with an unspoken tension neither dared to voice. The short elevator ride to the upper floors felt longer than any before. When they reached her door, Madeline turned to thank him for dinner, but the words caught in her throat as Miles, with sudden resolve, stepped closer and cupped her face in his hands. The kiss came naturally, intensely. Neither hesitated. Their mouths met with a restrained urgency, full of everything they had tried to keep beneath the surface. When they finally parted, Miles's gaze remained locked on hers, as if seeking an answer he himself could not articulate. His breath was uneven. After a few seconds, he whispered, "That shouldn't have happened." There was no coldness in his voice, only a deep, conflicted honesty that struck Madeline harder than the kiss itself. He held her gaze a moment longer, then ran a tense hand through his hair and murmured, "Good night, Madeline," before turning and walking down the hall. Madeline entered her room on trembling legs, leaning back against the door as her heart pounded wildly. The kiss lingered on her lips, etched into her skin, her memory. No amount of rationalizing could change what she felt. She was in love. This was no passing attraction. It was something deeper, growing stronger with every conversation, every glance, every moment spent with him. Yet that kiss, followed by his admission that it shouldn't have happened, left her reeling. Had Miles regretted it? Had it been a mere impulse? Would he be willing to acknowledge what was building between them? The questions tangled in her mind. And that night, even lying in bed, sleep wouldn't come. Desire, fear, and uncertainty now coursed together through her heart. The car was waiting for them outside the hotel. Madeline stepped out with her small suitcase, her eyes heavy from a restless night. Miles was already in the lobby, on the phone, a serious expression on his face. When he noticed her, he ended the call and gave a slight nod. They got into the car without exchanging many words. The driver headed toward the executive airport, the silence in the backseat almost palpable. Miles didn't bring up what had happened the night before, nor did he pretend it hadn't. He simply remained quieter than usual, eyes fixed on the window for long stretches. Madeline, seated beside him, struggled to maintain her composure, but the weight in her chest refused to ease. She didn't know how to interpret his distance, whether it was retreat, guilt, or simply his way of handling situations that slipped out of his control. On the plane, the mood remained the same. Miles was buried in reports, while she pretended to watch the clouds outside the window. Yet the kiss from the previous night lingered between them, unspoken but present in every restrained movement. Back in Chicago, after landing at the hangar, Miles simply wished her good night and went straight to the company car waiting for him. Madeline returned to her apartment alone. The moment she stepped inside, she sank onto the couch and slowly slipped off her shoes, as if postponing the inevitable confrontation with her own feelings. She couldn't shake what had happened from her mind. The kiss, its intensity, his whispered words afterward, and now, the silence. She had hoped for some kind of gesture, a message, anything that would hint at what he was thinking. She tried distracting herself with a book or some mindless show on TV, but nothing worked. Her body was there, but her mind spun in endless circles. No matter how much she tried to reason through it, there was no denying the truth anymore. What she felt for Miles wasn't some passing whim. It was real. She couldn't pretend otherwise. Early Monday morning, her phone buzzed. A message from Miles's assistant. He was requesting a meeting that afternoon. Madeline's heart jumped. The message was direct, without explanations. The whole day, her mind raced with what he might say. Would he pull back? End the contract? Had she unknowingly crossed a line? She dressed with care. When she arrived at the Preston and Locke building, everything felt as formal as usual, but the walk to his office seemed longer than ever. When she entered, Miles was standing by the window, hands in his pockets. He turned when he saw her and asked her to sit. The first few minutes, he spoke of practical matters, as though stalling. Madeline remained silent, listening, waiting. Finally, he broke off and looked at her directly. His expression wasn't that of a CEO. It was that of a man about to lower his guard in a quieter tone. Miles admitted that he hadn't planned that kiss. Not out of regret, but because it had caught him off guard. He confessed he'd been fighting the feelings for days, maybe weeks, trying to maintain professionalism and respect her space, but he didn't know how to keep his distance anymore. He said he didn't know what she felt or what she wanted to hear, but he needed to be honest. Madeline listened, her throat dry. His words weren't some calculated seduction. There was sincerity in every sentence, a careful thoughtfulness. When he stopped speaking, a few moments of silence passed. Then, softly, she replied, "I don't know what to do with what I'm feeling either." It wasn't a full confession, but it was all she could manage at that moment. In the days that followed, work continued, but something between them had shifted. The tension wasn't about professional boundaries anymore. It was something deeper, something neither could ignore. Miles treated her with the same respect, but their time alone crackled with meaning. Madeline found herself more and more drawn in. The contract still existed, but it no longer defined what was happening between them. Lingering glances, charged silences, small gestures, each added a new layer to their dynamic. And it was clear to both that each day, the feelings grew stronger. Madeline was no longer just a hired companion. She was someone who moved Miles in a way he didn't even try to hide. And that left her caught between hope and fear. One Friday evening, Miles invited her to dinner, a more casual one this time. He said he wanted to talk somewhere less formal, away from the office. He sent the address to his apartment in an upscale part of the city. Madeline hesitated briefly, but accepted. When she arrived, the atmosphere was warm, the lighting soft, the table simply set. Miles greeted her without a suit, dressed in casual clothes. During dinner, they laughed, talked about lighter topics, and the evening's ease stood in contrast to everything they'd been navigating. But as time passed, the air between them thickened. Their gazes lingered longer. Their silences carried more weight. After dinner, they sat on the sofa, wine glasses still in hand. Miles looked at her with an intensity she felt across every inch of her skin. Finally, he set down his glass and quietly said, "You make me forget there are limits." His words hung in the air for a moment. Before she could answer, Miles leaned in. There was no hesitation. He cupped her face firmly and kissed her. This wasn't a fleeting impulse like before. It was a kiss full of desire and everything they hadn't dared say for weeks. Madeline responded without thinking. Their lips met urgently, and for a moment, the rest of the world faded. Miles's hand slid along her neck while she clutched his shoulders, her whole body responding. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. Miles kept his hands on her face, his eyes locked on hers. He didn't speak. His look held desire, respect, and an inner conflict he couldn't hide. After a few seconds, he stepped back, ran a hand through his hair, and walked to the door. He opened it slowly and stood waiting, letting her decide when to leave. Madeline rose, her knees a little shaky, her heart racing. When they stood face to face, Miles held her hand for a moment. The look they shared said everything neither was ready to speak aloud. As she walked through the quiet city streets, the cool night air did little to calm the whirlwind inside her. She was completely caught up in it now. There was no pretending. This was just a professional relationship. And even though she didn't know what the future would bring, Madeline knew there was no going back anymore. The week that followed the dinner at Miles's apartment was packed with back-to-back commitments. There were strategic meetings, gatherings with foreign investors, and an important business forum where Miles's presence was highly anticipated. Since the kiss they had shared, the dynamic between them had shifted irreversibly. In the corporate setting, they maintained the professionalism expected of them. In public, Madeline remained the poised and elegant companion. Miles introduced her with the same composed and controlled tone as always, without any visible display of affection. But behind the scenes, in the brief moments alone between engagements, the distance they tried to maintain dissolved with ease. Every glance, every casual touch carried a growing undercurrent of desire. And during car rides between events, away from prying eyes, the kisses returned with an urgency neither could suppress. The tension between them was constant. Miles demonstrated impressive self-control, but it didn't always hold. During a lunch with international partners, the looks he gave Madeline spoke volumes without a word. The moment they stepped into the waiting car, he closed the partition, gripped her hand firmly, and pulled her into a kiss so intense it left no room for resistance. The moment was brief, constrained by the setting, but filled with a raw intensity. That left Madeline even more captivated. Minutes later, as they returned to public view, an energy lingered between them that anyone paying close attention would have noticed. Even so, Miles worked to keep everything within the bounds of discretion. One rainy afternoon, between two major meetings, Miles asked Madeline to wait for him in the private office he kept in one of the city's luxury hotels. The space was reserved solely for him. The moment he closed the door, he turned and locked eyes with her. Without a word, he stepped closer, slid his hands around her waist, and kissed her with an intensity that seemed to drain the tension built up over the past days. When the kiss finally broke, he rested his forehead against hers and whispered, "I don't want this to interfere with your work here, but I can't stay away from you." His words left Madeline even more conflicted. She knew that both the contract and her role placed them on precarious ground, but her heart no longer followed logic. The feeling had taken hold, no matter how much she tried to convince herself otherwise. At night, alone in her apartment, Madeline replayed every gesture, every word, every touch from Miles. Her longing was as strong as the fear of what this could mean. She worried about jeopardizing the trust she had earned, about crossing a line that might upend everything they had built so far. But what consumed her most was the thought that she couldn't imagine her days without him anymore. What had begun as admiration or attraction had grown into something deeper. She was in love with him, truly, completely, and with each passing moment, she was more and more drawn in. Even at the most formal events, standing beside him, there was a connection that defied logic. And when he pulled away to deal with the demands of running the company, a sharp sense of absence settled painfully in her chest. The pace didn't slow. Business lunches, dinners, presentations. Miles seemed even more tense, weighed down by pressures he never voiced. Preston & Locke was facing critical weeks, and he bore the burden of decisions that would affect thousands. Still, he found ways to be near Madeline. Between meetings, he would pass through the lounge where she waited, drawing her into a quiet corner just to touch her or steal a breathless kiss. For Madeline, these small moments only deepened the feeling she could no longer contain. No matter how she tried to tell herself otherwise, there was no room left for doubt. She was too far gone, torn between what she knew was right and what her heart cried out for. That Friday evening, after another formal dinner, as the car carried them back through the city, Miles cupped her face in both hands and kissed her deeply, with a tenderness that stood in contrast to the intensity of the past few days. When he pulled back, his eyes locked on hers, he said quietly, "I need you." Madeline couldn't find the words to reply. A lump formed in her throat, and tears threatened to rise. So powerful was the emotion behind those simple words. In that moment, she knew without a shadow of a doubt that she was helplessly, irreversibly in love with him. The following week was even more intense. Miles was deep in the final negotiations of high-stakes contracts, lengthy board meetings, and private sessions with foreign investors. Even for those unaware of what was happening behind the scenes at Preston & Locke, the mounting pressure on him was visible. Madeline, who accompanied him to many public engagements, noticed a fatigue in his gestures and the rare pauses between meetings. In the corporate environment, they upheld the professional demeanor they had agreed on. But behind the scenes in car rides, in the brief intervals between events, the kisses and touches had become unavoidable, charged with a desire that neither of them tried to hide anymore. Miles could no longer maintain the distance between them, and Madeline, more captivated each day, had stopped resisting. The bond between them had long surpassed any boundary the contract might have set. Some days, Miles barely had time to breathe, moving from one meeting to the next with a tense expression and an exhausted gaze. And still, he would find ways to send messages to Madeline, even if it was just a few words to say he was thinking of her. In their rare private moments, he held her with an urgency that spoke louder than words. At a formal dinner, Madeline could see just how drained he was. Backstage, before they entered the grand ballroom, Miles leaned discreetly against the wall, pulled her close, and kissed her deeply, as though needing that moment just to steady himself. The words he whispered afterwards stayed with her. Only, "You can make me forget all of this." The look they shared in those moments said far more than any formal declaration. And with each passing day, Madeline gave herself over to these feelings more and more, even as the storm of emotions inside her continued to grow. That Friday, after an especially grueling day for Miles, Madeline received a message that felt different. From the usual, an invitation to have dinner at his place. It didn't sound like a simple professional gathering. There was something in his tone that revealed a desire to share a more personal, intimate moment. Madeline didn't hesitate, though part of her still feared what this evening might mean. The truth was, she could no longer say no to anything that came from Miles. She prepared carefully, choosing a simple dress that suited the more intimate setting, and made her way to the address she now knew well. When she arrived, the reception was different. Miles greeted her casually, wearing relaxed clothes, his expression a mix of exhaustion and tenderness that touched her deeply. The dinner was simple, prepared with the help of a private chef who soon left them alone. Their conversation began, lightly, filled with laughter that helped ease the tension of the past few days. But as the night went on, their glances became more intense, weighted with unspoken longing. Miles no longer held anything back. He touched her gently, fingertips tracing her arm, his gaze locked on hers. When they set their wine glasses aside and settled onto the couch, the silence between them spoke volumes. Miles pulled her to him, slowly, kissing her with an intensity that left no doubt. Madeline responded without thinking. There was no more inner conflict, no more resistance. The desire, affection, and passion between them poured out freely. Everything unfolded naturally. Miles led her to the bedroom, the atmosphere warm and inviting. Their clothes came off gradually, each movement blending warmth and tenderness. When their bodies finally met, the connection was absolute. That first night together was a perfect balance of passion and care. Miles was attentive, deliberate. Madeline gave herself completely, discovering a depth of feeling in his touch she had never known. There was no contract anymore, no roles to uphold. They were simply a man and a woman, bound by a feeling too deep for words. And when they finally drifted off, wrapped in each other's arms, Madeline felt a peace she hadn't known in a very long time. The next morning, still lying side by side, Miles brushed her hair with his fingers and whispered a soft "good morning," full of warmth. There was no awkwardness, no distance. They shared breakfast with quiet smiles and lingering looks that spoke louder than any conversation. When Madeline left the apartment, she felt changed. She was no longer the young woman hired to fill a role. She wasn't just an event companion. The bond between them was now real, undeniable. And as she walked through the streets of Chicago, heart light, soul at ease, she knew her life would never be the same again. The days that followed that night marked a clear shift between them. At Preston and Locke, Miles maintained the same professional demeanor he was known for, and Madeline made a point of respecting the boundaries and discretion her role still required. But when they were alone within the walls of his apartment or at more private gatherings, their bond had evolved into something entirely different. There was no room for doubt anymore. What existed between them had far surpassed the formality of any contract. Miles no longer concealed how he felt. He was more affectionate, more present, sending messages throughout the day and seizing every opportunity to see her. For Madeline, her feelings could no longer be contained. She was deeply in love, unable to imagine her days without him. The closeness between them grew naturally, without the need for grand declarations. In an honest conversation, Miles made it clear he no longer wanted to hide what they were sharing, but both agreed they would continue to maintain a discreet presence within the professional environment. As strong and real as their relationship had become, respecting the company and Miles's public image remained essential. Together, they decided that Madeline would accompany him only to more personal social events, where the presence of wives and partners was expected. Outside of that, she would maintain a more private routine, focused on the new life they were gradually building together. The transition happened smoothly, without the need for public explanations. To outside observers, it simply seemed as though Madeline was attending fewer corporate functions, raising no real speculation. In the months that followed, their life settled into a new rhythm. Miles and Madeline spent more and more time together. At first, she stayed over at his apartment a few nights a week, but soon, their time together became more constant. It felt natural to wake up side by side, to share breakfast, to chat about the day's news. Their routine adapted with an ease that surprised them both. There were no expectations, no pressures. The home that had once felt formal and reserved now held warmth, an air of comfort and belonging. Miles appeared calmer, more at peace with her there, and Madeline felt she had finally found the space she had been searching for, a life filled with love, respect, and shared purpose. At the social events they attended together, their closeness was apparent, though never ostentatious. A glance, a subtle touch, a shared smile said everything to those who knew them well. Miles made a point of including Madeline in his personal decisions, listening to her thoughts and showing through countless small gestures how much he valued the woman beside him. Madeline, in turn, felt increasingly at ease in a world that had once seemed so out of reach. No longer an outsider, she was now an integral part of his life, and the love they shared grew stronger with each passing day. At home, away from the public eye, their relationship flourished. There were no more barriers. Miles was a loving, devoted man, and Madeline matched his passion with her own. Their nights were filled with intimacy and connection, their days marked by care and respect. What had begun as a cold agreement had blossomed into a genuine love, built on honesty and true companionship. They no longer needed explanations. Their bond was strong enough to carry everything they were building together. Time slipped by almost unnoticed. Weeks turned into months. Madeline felt increasingly fulfilled, more secure, and self-assured. The life they shared was full of simple moments they valued far more than any lavish affair. Miles no longer bothered to hide his feelings. Among their closest circles, it was obvious how much she meant to him. And for Madeline, who had once struggled just to cover the rent on a tiny apartment, happiness wasn't about luxury or status. It was in the love that filled her days. Each morning beside Miles was proof that every step of their journey had been worth it. And though they hadn't spoken of formal plans, both knew the future they were building together was only just beginning. Miles and Madeline's relationship had grown naturally, maturing with each passing day. Sharing their daily lives had built an ever-deepening bond. They faced the small joys and challenges of everyday life together, balancing the pressures of work with moments of rest and connection. Despite the immense responsibilities that weighed on Miles at Preston and Locke, it was with Madeline that he found the balance he needed. She was the person who truly helped him unwind. In time, without ever formally discussing it, Madeline moved out of her tiny apartment and into his home for good. It happened naturally, a quiet reflection of the love that grew stronger between them each day. She no longer saw herself as someone who simply accompanied Miles to events or engagements. She was part of his life now, in his routines and his plans, in everything that mattered. The months that followed unfolded at an easy pace. Though Miles's professional calendar remained demanding, the moments they shared together became more meaningful. Madeline still accompanied him to certain social events, always maintaining the discretion they had agreed upon. To those around them, their closeness was undeniable. Among their closest circles, it was already whispered how strong and genuine their relationship had become. Miles made no effort to hide his feelings. He treated Madeline with respect and affection in every setting. At home, away from public view, he was an openly loving and attentive partner. And for Madeline, each gesture, each word, only confirmed what she already knew, that she had found far more than just a companion. She had found a true life partner. On a quiet night, after dining at the same restaurant where they had shared some of their first evenings together, Miles surprised her. They were walking along the shores of Lake Michigan, under a clear sky, when he stopped, took her hands in his, and with a look full of emotion, asked the question she had never expected to hear so soon. There was no rehearsed speech, only sincere words. He told her he wanted her to be his wife, that he wanted to build a future with her in every sense. Madeline's heart raced. Tears welled up before she could stop them. With a trembling voice, she whispered, "Yes." The embrace they shared that night remained etched in their memory as one of the happiest moments of their lives. A few months later, their wedding took place. It was elegant, but intimate, celebrated with only family and close friends. There was no need for grand displays. What mattered was the strength of their love. And when Madeline discovered she was pregnant, joy filled their home. Miles took care of every detail, ensuring that she was comfortable and safe throughout. The birth of their twin daughters brought even more light into their lives. The house was now filled with laughter, the gentle routines of caring for the babies, and the love that only grew stronger. Miles, already a successful man, embraced his role as a devoted father and loving husband with ease. And Madeline, who had once struggled just to get by, now lived a happiness she had never dared to dream of. One peaceful afternoon, while the girls slept soundly in their crib and the house rested in a rare moment of stillness, Madeline sat on the veranda with a cup of tea in her hands. She looked out at the garden, at the life they had built together. Her thoughts drifted back to that day, when hope had been nearly lost and she'd received that unexpected phone call for an interview. She thought of the doubts, the fears, the choices she had made along the way, and with a quiet certainty, her heart warmed. It had all been worth it. It wasn't about wealth or status. It was about the love that filled every corner of their home, every gesture from Miles, every glance from their daughters. She smiled softly. She was happy. She was at peace. And deep down, she knew this was only the beginning of a future they would continue to build together day by day, side by side. The end. So, what did you think of this story? Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel to keep enjoying stories like this one. See you next time.